Welcome to the Onslow County Museum's Throwback Thursday, and we have a guest here in the museum. We have Norman Bryson. Mr. Bryson is the Director of Onslow County Emergency Services, and really the inclement weather, emergency preparedness. I don't even know the list of certifications and titles, and really you're just our all-around emergency guru, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Lisa, and I appreciate that. And this time of year, we also have spent a lot of time talking about storms, hurricanes. This is the time of year that we is a little bit more about what's going on in the Atlantic and how we're preparing for it. And not that Onslow County can't have snowstorms, but it's not as prevalent as we are to hurricanes.
Well, and that's why we wanted to do this as a Throwback Thursday, Norman. Onslow County is situated in such a location, just above the Cape Fear River with our New River and our White Oak River. We are a coastal community, as our map depicts here, but hurricanes have always been a part of our story. So much so that here in the museum we feature the story of the town of Johnston. And when I have tour groups, especially children, I always say, hey, have you ever been to Johnston? And the majority are like, no, where was Johnston? And as we tell here in this story, it was our colonial precinct county seat. So much as Jacksonville is our county seat today, this is where the county business took place, where our courthouse was, our jail was, it was really the center of population. But you've also done some homework into the history of hurricanes, and you can talk a little bit about how severe that storm was in 1752.
Well, sure. As you well know, I am myself my own amateur historian. And to go along with that, as we try to spend time preparing our future for hurricanes, we have to also look in the past and see what some of those effects are to the county and what they have been over the years. One of the things that I've been trying to change for a long time is people's perception on how they prepare for storms. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is people spend time, well, what was the last storm like? Right. And I've even heard it come from some state and officials of, hurricane last. Well, what I want to change is let's prepare for what are some of the worst circumstances that we can see to be prepared to the utmost end of that. And, as you talk about the 1752 storm that really caused a change here significantly in Onslow County, is one of the most powerful storms that has hit the state of North Carolina. And I say that because from what we can tell by records, more than likely it was probably a Category 4 hurricane, which is one of the strongest. Now, as we talk about the history of hurricanes, from the research I've done, we've got 6, maybe 7, and I say that because the records are not there, the data is not there. We don't track storms, we track storms better today than what we did centuries ago. Right, and the technology was not there to track them. So we're looking 6, possibly 7 storms that are Category 4 level. We don't see any Category 5s, but we've got at least 6 Category 4s, maybe 7 that have impacted the state of North Carolina. 3 in the area of the southeast, which are anywhere from around Brunswick, New Hanover County, all the way up to Carteret, and 3 more that went into the Pamlico Sound, hit the Outer Banks, and affected that area. But this storm is what looks to be a direct impact here in Onslow County. And, the population at that point in time, it's not what it is today. Right. I mean, we're talking a few hundred families is all that is here. We're talking about the United States is not even the United States yet.
Right, exactly.
We're still a colony at this point in time. So we have a few settlements here. People start to grow. We do have a courthouse. We do have a jail here in Onslow County. As we've talked very recently, is the shape of the county very much looks like it is today with the borders and the outlines are. But this storm comes in, and it is a very heavy impact in the town of Johnston, which is not here now, which is much closer and further up the New River than where Jacksonville is currently. Came in and significant impacts of storm surge, heavy rains and winds, and we do have some records that deaths occurred. There's some naming that occurred because of the storm. Hadnot Point. One of the stories that we have, Hadnot Point, was one of the Hadnot children got washed away from their home. Came upon this point when people found the child. The only thing you can say is Hadnot. So that section, which is now Boyle Camp Lejeune, is known as Hadnot Point because of that child being found there. And that's the stories that we have from that.
But, you know, when we think about that kind of impact, that's actually, you know, this point on the river now, as we know, is part of Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune. But it sits out on what is known as Old Town Point, and people may know that area much more as Old Town Point than Johnston, because the old town got washed away. And then, you know, the county leaders or precinct leaders made the determination, let's move upriver. But, you know, you talk about that kind of storm surge was able to rise up, come up the river, and wash that town away. It wasn't just wind, as we often talk about with hurricanes. It was the rising of the water, potentially, 10 feet or more.
And that's some of the records. If we look at today and what we can do, and looking at some of our modeling for actual bringing in storm surge, at Cat 4, depending on the angle, and angle is whether it was a coming up from the south or whether it came in like Florence. Now, the direction Florence came across the Atlantic and kind of came straight at Onslow County across the Atlantic, which, as you would see, would bulldoze more water and push more water ahead of it as it comes in. If you have a storm that is grazing up the Atlantic and then makes landfall, it is pushing it in, but it's pushing the water in a different direction. So we don't know which direction it came in, but you could potentially be seeing in some areas of the county as much as 20 foot of storm surge. So, you know, it's a very significant amount depending on angle. And, you know, when we start talking to people about these storms and talking about angle, we have to start breaking our storms down in the story that we're telling people of how hurricanes are coming to our area and what they may be. And it's another piece that we want to start talking about. We want to break the storm down. We want to talk about the wind. We want to talk about the rain. We want to talk about the storm surge. But the other piece, and this comes from Florence that we just had 2 years ago, we also want to talk about the duration.
Right. So, you know, one of the things that you and I talk about all the time, we name hurricanes, but they really do have personalities. I mean, you and I have done this a long time. We've worked together 20 years now and more often than not during this time of year with storms. And what you and I, the commonality I think we always have is that every storm has its own personality and nature. And it's hard to just say, to leave it at Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3. These storms are far more than just that number. Talk a little bit, if you will, about those personalities.
Right. As you know, today we name storms, and they can be anywhere from Ben. We've seen some very recently named Teddy, Vicky, Sally. And if you would think of these storms like individuals, like persons, they each have their own temperament. They have their own direction in life. They are different. And I think that kind of goes along with some of these storms is you see, let's use a very big Cat 4 name that's very familiar with people here in East North Carolina, Hazel.
Absolutely.
Hurricane Hazel was a Category 4 that went in somewhere around Brunswick County, New Hanover County, and Wilmington. Well, it was a Category 4, so a lot of storm surge came in with this Category 4. There was a lot of wind with this storm. But when we start talking about the rainfall totals from what I've seen are only around 12 inches up in this area. But then we shift over to a name that we were very familiar with now called Florence. The winds were not as heavy. There was decent storm surge with Florence, but not heavy like a Cat 4 would be. But then there was rain. Almost 40 inches of rain, days and days and days, and that's part of that duration we've been talking about. So Florence came in, meandered a little bit. It took a long time for it to go away. Recently we've had Isis, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, that came in. It was very fast moving, not a lot of rain. some winds here in the county, not much storm surge. So each one of these storms has a different personality.
And you know, when we talk about preparation, it's not preparing for one aspect of that personality. It's not just tying down your lawn furniture because of high wind. It's not just making sure your car is parked a little bit higher in the driveway because of high water. It's all of those things. And I think that's sometimes when we've missed the mark in preparation because we think, oh, I cleaned up my yard, nothing's going to blow away. But it's far more than that.
Well, as we also talk about preparation, I talked earlier about setting the goals of what we're looking for. So if we know that no Category 5, we've got no good evidence that Category 5 has hit, so that means we should be preparing for at least the Category 4 will come in at some point in time. And if we look at the spacing over time and the averages and the math, then more than likely at some point in my annual lifetime, we will have another Category 4 that will impact our area.
Well, you know, and that was the worry 2 years ago. So we looked at Florence, and every indication was she was going to be a 4.
Correct.
And maybe her winds weren't 4, but the amount of water that was pushed up. We saw New Bern getting water the day before the storm was even ready to make landfall. We saw that water getting pushed up the Trent and the Neuse there. And then, as you said, 4 days, 40 inches of rain. We were all ready to build an ark.
But part of my pun, Florence is not our high water mark. We have another storm that hit in the 1800s that actually dumped almost 60 inches. It was 56 inches of rain that was recorded on the White Oak River that rained here in Onslow County. So we have another storm. It's not named. It's not been in any of our lifetimes, but it almost dumped 60 inches of rain, and that's another part of our preparation. If those things that we're looking at is preparing Onslow County for one day that we may see another storm of that amount of rainfall.
Well, you know, when we think about that, what I hear you saying is we have a historical record. It might not have been 10 years ago or 5 years ago. It might have been 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 100 years ago. But everything tells us that Onslow County has been touched in some way by storms that have all of these different personalities. 5 feet of rain, 95 mile an hour winds, 120 mile an hour winds.
Up to 140 mile an hour winds.
Up to 140 mile an hour. So we've seen them, perhaps not recently, or not all of those characteristics at the same time, but we've seen them.
Well, one of the things, in my lifetime talking to people about histories of the storms, you know, I've had some employees sometimes when I talk history with them say, you know, history was not my favorite subject, and you know, why do I need to study it? Well, in the examples of this type of situation, it's starting to give us a better picture of what we need to prepare for. Years ago, after Hurricane Hazel came through Onslow County, I got a phone call from a gentleman that says, when I bought my beach house here in Onslow County, nobody ever told me there was hurricanes. And I thought for a moment that was the craziest statement I ever heard. Well, I did some research, and going back through that history and doing the research, 1996, in our current lifetimes, is a huge game changer for hurricanes for Onslow County, the state of North Carolina. In 1996, we began with Hurricane Bertha, which was in Category 1, and then we had Hurricane Fran, which made direct landfall here in Onslow, right on the Pender-Onslow County line, which seemed to get damaged. Before that, we have to go back almost to 1971 before we had another landfall hurricane that really affected this area. In the 80s, we had Diane and Gloria that came in, looked like they were going to make impact, but then went back out again. But we went through a period of time where we really didn't get impacted by storms that much. And people will always say, well, why is that? Well, some of the things that we're learning from meteorology is telling us that we may go through periods of 30 years of high and 30 years of lows with the impacts of these hurricanes. And right now we're in the high impact times. And what climate change may bring to us, we're not sure. But it is one thing that we have to spend time to prepare for. So, you know, when the gentleman made the comment, Well, nobody told me, if you look at the history of it, then at the time he was buying that storm, there's a lot of people that have not gone through a lot of hurricanes. Now, since 1996, we've had Bertha, Fran, Dennis, Floyd. We've had Irene. We've had Florence. And, you know, when we talk about intensities, one other thing we have to also talk about, again, is going back to that rainfall total. We had one storm that came here that with great impact, it was a named storm, but it was not a hurricane. And that was Tropical Storm Nicole back in 2009, I believe.
Right.
It dropped 24 inches of rain. And that night of the heaviest rainfalls, we had people that couldn't get home. You know, the White Oak River, the New River, Piney, and the areas around Piney Green, Queens Creek backed up because of all the amount of rain that we had and flooded, and people were stopped on the side of the road. So as we're looking at these storms, we've started setting in some parameters of what of these storms really affect us. So one thing from the wind standpoint, if it makes that Hurricane Cat 1 barrier of 75 miles an hour, that is one thing that we put on our check mark, and yes, this will bring impact to us to make us do certain reactions. Below that, we have nor'easters on a regular basis that come through here that bring winds, 60s and up, that cost a little bit, but it's not a significant damage. But the other piece, again, is checking off that block when it talks about rainfall totals. And rainfall totals, and that was a duration of 3 days. So anything that's going to be above 8 inches of rainfall for us in a short amount of time is a significant amount, will cause significant flooding. The great thing about our environment here in geography in Onslow County is we don't take rainfall water from other counties. The New River stops and starts here.
Right.
The White Oak is on the Onslow, Jones County, Carteret County border, and we drain fairly well and very quickly versus the Neuse River and the Cape Fear River basins, which takes from 20, 30 counties itself, some of them all the way back into Raleigh, bringing that watershed down with them. So we may see flooding, but then we drain very quickly.
Well, and the other thing that we have to be mindful of, so the geography works in our favor, but then we have growth. You talked about people building on the beach, but beyond that, we've created lots of impermeable surface, and with trees being taken down, that in and of itself, we then have man-made changes to our landscape.
So let's talk about effects on human life.
Right.
I mean, when you start talking about the effects on human life, let's step back in time. 1752, we've said that there was just a few hundred families here. So we're not talking about a lot of people here in the community. There's no such thing as power generation at that point in time either.
Right.
There's no other forms of communication other than writing letters and horseback or sending them out by ship or wagon or anything like that. As we progress even all the way up to Hurricane Hazel, we're looking at a population of somewhere around 40 to 60,000 people is here. Now that's quite a bit of growth. That's a lot more people in this community. Again, when you start talking about Hazel time frame, power is just really coming to Onslow County.
Yeah, especially to the rural areas.
And especially to those rural areas, you're not getting the power and stuff coming in there. Now we're talking about today. We're in the time with the census, and we hope people will definitely fill out their parts for the census so we have a good track of what we have here. But we're talking 200,000 people or more in our community today. And that's significantly more than what was just 60 years ago when Hazel came through. So it causes more effect. And another one of those issues is we have power. We have power here everywhere today. And as these storms come through, and that's one of the things in the community that we really want the citizens to start preparing for, is if you hear the name hurricane, you should have to start preparing for some aspect of power outage. Just like what we just did with Isaias. We had 50,000 people without power for about 2 days.
We talked about preparations, and again, power outage. With Florence, I shockingly lost phone service for my landline, and that very rarely impacts people. So, we move forward. We look historically, and we think, okay, what have the impacts of these storms been and how have they changed? We look at the community and how it's changed. We look at the way that they communicate and how that's changed. And we think, oh, well, technology, we're going to get that fixed. We're going to get people out. How long can I be without power? And then we look at Florence, or we look more at Brand, and people were without power for 2 weeks. So it's not, oh, well, the utility company is going to be able to get right back in, because when we have trees down or we have a large swath of area that's affected by the storm, they might not get here immediately. So as you said, the preparations we make, we used to say 3 days of water.
We're now at 7.
7 days of water. So talk, Norman, if you will, please. As we talk to our audience very, very pointedly about preparations, it's not 3 days of water. It's not, a week's worth of food. But because these storms either changed in severity or the difficulty in getting here after the storm, that was one of the issues with Florence. You've got that much water, people can't even get to us. Talk about how seriously we should take preparations.
Well, we should take preparation very, very seriously. And it's not, the other thing, we're talking very much about hurricanes. But from an emergency management standpoint, we want people to take preparation as a year round. Yes, we are talking about the hurricanes, but we can also name in our lifetime the 2 significant snowstorms that we've had on the East Coast that, again, took power out for long periods of time. We can expect to have one of these events to occur to us again in our lifetime as well. And the preparation, because once you start talking about snow and ice, you can now start talking about your transportation, your roadways are out, things don't move as well. You could have long periods of times of power outages. And people do need to have an expectation in a very, very significant, serious storm. It still may be weeks before power can come back on again. So the other thing they have to remember, power generation, the actual generating of the power doesn't occur here in Onslow County. It occurs in other locations, and then it is brought in through main transmission lines into the county. So you could have a significant hurricane that affects the power generation. And our lines may be good here, but they've got to get the generation back up and the transmission flowing back into the county.
Well, to tie back into our idea of communication and history, one of the things we hear at the museum that children ask especially is, Miss Lisa, how did they know a storm was coming? Well, sometimes they didn't. They couldn't prepare. We know that storms are on the horizon, and we have time to prepare. So, if you will, kind of address the idea that we don't want to wait till the last minute. Maybe that storm won't hit. Maybe it will skirt past us. Maybe it will be a quick storm, but maybe it won't. And that we don't need to really make that, we sometimes see that stereotypical last minute dash to the grocery store for milk and bread. This is a year-round proposition, preparation.
Correct. So, in the year-round being prepared for storms, the first thing we always talk to people about is you have to worry about feeding your family, bringing the water in. We talked about that a couple times already. And if you go to a lot of different sites and stuff, they will tell you 3 to 5 days worth of food and water to be able to have. But to be honest with you, because of the storms we're seeing now and some of these durations, we want people to actually spend more time and actually develop that for a longer period. Since Florence, we've moved that out to 7 days as our recommendation of making sure that you have the food and water preparation on hand. But you may even want to look even longer than that, because if we do have a significant storm coming through, it may be a very, very long period of time before our transportation routes are over. We're able to get commodities back into our community and be able to provide for our citizens. Now, part of that is if you're looking at food and water, you're also making part of that preparations if something happens immediately. But with storms like hurricanes, because we are able to see them now as they develop off the coast of Africa. Matter of fact, there are even predictions now even showing the storms as in percentage of chance of development as they are on the Sahara Desert. So we have weeks ahead of time of seeing these storms. So part of that, if we do see a significant storm coming through, is actually people working and developing on, should I stay or should I go?
Right, even your evacuation plan.
You know, the evacuation plans that you may have. What is a trigger point for me of whether I'm going to stay here in Onslow County, or do I need to pick myself and my family up and I need to go inland and get out of the path of this storm? Because those category 4s, I would tell no one needs to stay.
No one needs to. You know, that's the other thing is having that. You know, we have a notebook that we follow when we prepare, and it's knowing where I'm going to go, when I'm going to go, what are those trigger points. If I stay, what are my capabilities here? And then ultimately thinking, you know, I know what I have to have, but for a lot of our families, that could be an expensive proposition. You know, not everybody has a space in their home. What do we need to tell folks to do about how they can gradually prepare versus, again, I don't need to go out and buy a full-on house generator today. That's a terribly expensive proposition. So what are the little steps that you recommend about understanding those trigger points and understanding what I can do reasonably?
So first thing is there's several lists that you can go out to. You can look at some places like FEMA.org or NC Ready, and you can see what are some of the things that have on preparation lists. And what you can do with those is actually start buying them a little bit at a time. So I start getting a few cans of food today. A couple of weeks from now, I may pick up a little bit more, a few items. You gradually build that overall items that you have on your preparation list. It doesn't mean you start out at the full end of that list in the beginning. And we have a lot of young families living here because the Marine Corps is here. And I know, you know, you can't go out and just immediately spend $300 worth of food on food just in one whack just to sit on the shelf. And it should be something, your preparation kit should be, you know, we talk about living documents, which means it's something you visit to often and go through. Your preparation kit should be that way as well, which means you go in and look at your dates on any of your, if you have canned goods or items like that, and make sure you rotate them out with other food items that you may have as you're buying through the time. So it goes through a rotation as you're developing it as well. We always definitely recommend that people definitely take a stop and look at the kits at the beginning in June when hurricane season starts. That's one of the reasons we have some of these start and stop dates. Now, we all know that doesn't mean that you can only have a hurricane between June the 1st and the end of November.
Right.
Because we have actually seen hurricanes develop outside of that time frame.
Yeah.
But part of the reason we put those dates in place is this is starting to get into your higher time frame when they're more likely to happen. It's the more frequent time. And it does give people a reminder about looking at your kits and starting the preparation and starting to make sure I've looked at it and make sure I have everything in place. But I would encourage people to, you know, don't just look at the storm for preparing I want to stay. You know, also look at that storm for preparing and what may be some things that you start hearing about this storm coming up that says, I need to go, I need to notify my family of where I'm going, what I'm going to do, and where I'm going to be at. Because, again, we've had one in 1752. We've had in the 1800s one that went in around Beaufort that almost killed the governor because he was attending a ball. And then we had in the 1950s, then we had Hazel come in. So we've had these very large, deadly storms before, and they will affect us again.
Well, you know, and as we kind of wrap up, it's having that eye to the past of what storms have been. It's preparing for what's coming next. But this year, Norman, we have the added difficulty and challenge of COVID-19. And that as we're preparing, we need to be mindful when we go to the grocery store of those things that are limited. So there are things about post-storm that we need to have, like cleaning supplies and paper products. again, making that part of that preparation as well. But being mindful that some things are limited.
And having masks. And, you know, the other thing that comes to is, as you're buying these products, you also have to think about, well, if one of the things we want to do is go to the local shelter. We have in mind that because of COVID-19, sheltering could be very limited in the county because we have to do social distancing and we have to cut out areas for people, which we will be keep them very much closer in previous storms. So you also have to think of some things that we have provided before in the past at sheltering that we cannot do now because we're trying to maintain social distancing, not having social game boards and stuff out for the kids. You know, it's something more that you should be preparing just directly for your kids, making sure you have preparation taking care of your pets. Because, you know, years ago, several decades ago, you and I were both part of it, when we started the pet-friendly shelters here in Onslow County as part of our sheltering system as well, is because we have a lot of people in our communities have pets, and a lot of people think of their pets as their children.
Yes.
So, you know, you have to take them into account in preparation as well.
You know, you mentioned that, and we should say that as we're taping this and as we're preparing, you know, for this to air, you and I are socially distanced, but we both have our masks with us.
Have a mask with us.
And that's part of all of that mindfulness. And I think that would be the best thing that we could kind of close on, is being mindful of what storms have been and what they can be. And if, you know, one last thing is if you could leave our viewers with the best way to find out any of this information through your office, because you all are a tremendous resource about preparation, and then certainly post-storm and recovery, you all are the go-to there. So if you could talk just a little bit about how Onslow County has evolved in our response in helping our citizens.
Well, one of the biggest things is about getting communications. Even the method that we're using today is communicating to our citizens about what's going on and preparation and preparedness. Other places they can go to get additional information, one will be the Onslow County website that you can go to, and you can click onto the Emergency Services Department and go under the Emergency Management Division, and they have several links and items that deal directly with preparation. Now, one of the other things that we do on a regular basis is citizens can call our county office at 910-347-4270 and talk directly with personnel in our office about preparation, what they should do. We would also, you know, recommend some of these other links to go back and look at. But, you know, Onslow County, we're going to have more storms in our future, and it's something that we shouldn't take very lightly. And, you know, it's not, like I said earlier, it's not just hurricanes, it's not just snowstorms, we've had tornadoes and other things. And we want our people to be prepared, because the better prepared they are, the more we can do to limit the cost of life or injuries that we may have in our community. So, you know, by all means, please come to our website, please contact our office, and we'll be glad to talk to you about preparation.
Norman, thank you for being here for Throwback Thursday. To help us kind of understand the nature and personality and changing characteristics of storms through time, and helping us prepare for that next storm.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I always appreciate coming here to do Zoom.